invite Eric Kelly up here to talk about grief and resilience. Eric has been a really important part of the board, encouraging us to talk about our journeys, and I really look forward to hearing from you today. Thank you.
So as Susan said, I'm a board member, and it was years ago when actually Mike and Kristen were up here talking, sharing their Jack story. They're talking about starting a foundation. I'll say my origin story is completely opposite of Susan and how she felt hope when they heard about the foundation. I've shared this with some people when I see Mike and Kristen at the First Foundation smiling all the time. I'm like, they're in a cult. They're crazy. Like, you see their son's Jack. How can they be so happy? And so they, after the first conference, then they called. Kristen called my wife and said, "I'd like us to join." My wife told me this. I came home from work. I said, "Absolutely not. They have no experience of doing a foundation. This is how they're grieving. They don't know what they're doing. It's gonna be like a Girl Scout, Boy Scout thing." And then my wife called her back and said, "Absolutely, we'd love to join." So she has 51% of the vote. But so this is a portion of a class I do for companies, and I'm in the military for military units because I strongly believe you got to be raw and real with it. Especially I try and talk to here with the fathers, because we can be very ego, prideful, and we probably have more of a harder shell than I'd argue the moms in this room. But hopefully this talks to everyone. So I'll go through the stages of grief and kind of end on a positive note. And really, I'm talking this from a practitioner point of view. I'm not a psychologist, and any of that. I'm in the military intelligence, but we all live this stuff. So maybe some things that'll help. So Ezra, as you see him out there, but he was born a Gerber baby. He was handsome, he was beautiful, and you could say I'm subjective to that, or I'm biased as a father, but my daughter was born first. She was not born a Gerber baby. She looked very much like me. Thank God she grew into her mother's beauty. Please don't share that with her on that side. But as my wife shared, there was no signs both in utero and post-birth, just, large head, but nothing. It was on the high side, but nothing totally crazy. But as my wife shared, so it was weeks later, we noticed, what we found out later is mosaicism. And then now the head was getting large, and we talked to a dermatologist, and it was macrocephaly. What my wife shared earlier was the first time she heard about seizure. It was from that dermatologist. That on the easy end, my son could just have this skin, have a big head, he could be totally normal. So this was his original working diagnosis before SKS. On the severe end, he would have physical and developmental delays, and worst cases, they see seizures. So that's what my wife heard. I heard the other end that, I guess the pigmentation didn't take like my daughter. He came out too early, didn't stay in the oven long enough. But it'll buff out. It'll be all right. But again, I was in shock and denial. My wife, she was totally taking it on. She still was in shock, but she was dealing with it. But I'm like, he's an O'Kelly. He's going to carry the family name. He's going to be all that is man. He'll be fine. And then it was when he was 6 months old, my wife shared, he had his first seizure. What I'll say, my wife didn't share, so over 20 years, labor and delivery, nurse and high risk. She woke me up, and again, I changed that time on there because you want to talk about true shock. So I've been to Afghanistan 2 times. I've been to Iraq 1 time. Killed people, have my buddies be killed, PTSD as you hear about. But I've never experienced so much shock of when my son has first seizure. I swear to this day, this was actually my birthday. We celebrated my birthday. We went to bed, and my wife woke me up, and her keywords I remember was, "I think he's having a seizure." No experienced nurse says "I think" when he's having especially a grand mal seizure. As I first did this class, I rehearsed with my wife, and she said, "Do you want me to tell you the real time when he had a seizure?" And she told me it was in the morning. It was my birthday, but I said, she goes, "It was light by the time they got in the ambulance and went to the hospital." I said, "I just remember it being dark." She said, "Do you remember our neighbors, our friends came over and talked to us?" And I said, "I remember when we came home from the hospital." And she said, "No, they were right there." So I called my buddy Mike up, and I was like, "Were you really there?" He said, "Yeah, man." He goes, and he's in the Army, been to war. He says, "I'm not surprised." He goes, "You had that shell shock type look, just those hollow eyes But thankfully, I was still with it to take care of my daughter as they were in the hospital. So now this was kicking off, but I'm like, it's fine. The satellite went off in the head. He's not going to have any more. He had more seizures. Now developmental delays started to take place. And then I say I couldn't deal with it, but really, I think any adult knows you can deal with stuff if you put in the work, and I wouldn't deal with it. So the beautiful thing about my job in this point in time is if you're called upon, you have to deploy. I wasn't necessarily called upon, so I was a newly promoted to major in school. I interviewed with a lot of units. A lot of units wanted me, and there was one particular unit with 1st Brigade 82nd Airborne Division. If you've seen Band of Brothers, that's 82nd. They wanted me, and I knew they were going to Afghanistan right when I graduated. So I lied to my wife, and I said, this is the #1 job I need to get. And it was a very good job. It was the only one deploying, because then I could leave my family, and no one would question why. I didn't want to divorce my wife. I didn't want to leave my family. I just didn't want to be there. I didn't want to deal with this stuff. So I had a great time in Afghanistan, but my wife was doing the real work back here. I didn't know she was doing all this because, one, she wants me focused on the fight forward so I can come home alive and be somewhat with it. And two, I didn't ask. Anytime we talked, I just wanted to talk to my daughter. I might say how Ezra's doing. She might share a little. If she got into details, I lie, say, hey, I got to go to work. I just want to do it. So I say the 6 and 7 here. My wife is already in the testing and acceptance phase. We're new in North Carolina. She was going to UNC, Duke. As we're talking EEGs earlier, my son was getting EEGs, ambulatory EEGs, all this stuff. So now I come home from deployment. It's about 8-9 months, and my last deployment, when I was dating my wife, I got this great hero's welcome, and I expected that when I came home. Went right into having some vacation, some time off, or say vacation, as we all know here. But now I was slapped in the face that every day was a therapist. It was going to this medical appointment, this treatment. And I was moving up because I did well in the deployment to another higher position. So I lied to my wife and said, hey, they need me in to work earlier. Maybe this is the first time she's hearing this. And then I lied to my boss and said, leave stuff got changed around, and I know he really needed me. And so he didn't know any of this stuff was going home. And so the great thing about being in an airborne unit, and especially in 82nd, arguably one of the hardest units, is we are constantly in the field. It's me and airplane. You're doing airborne operations, exercises, something. So I didn't have to be home. But now I'm really into my anger stage, and I became one of the best officers in that unit for intelligence. I have it on my paper. I'm not just me saying that. But I was an absentee father and husband, and this was affecting my daughter, who I wasn't thinking this through. So nobody really knew what was going on with my son, because I became a verbal ninja. Anytime, how's the family doing? I often didn't want to bring him to social events, or I just wouldn't go. But I could really shift from, hey, your son, how old is he? Oh, is this age? And then my daughter, my daughter. And I could put it back on you. How's your kid doing? I knew how to do that stuff by memory. But then my son got West syndrome, and it's actually when we heard about the steroid treatment earlier, we were talking over here like, I wonder if she's talking West syndrome. So my son had to go right into the hospital because if it's untreated, on average, most kids die before they're 5. So he had to go right into the hospital, which meant I had to take care of my daughter, and I never really took vacation. I had to go to my boss and explain to her what was going on. She had me close the door. She knew somewhat, heard a little bit about seizures. So she said, I just thought he had epilepsy. I said, no, he's actually, he had a working diagnosis at the time. He's nonverbal. He can't crawl or walk, all this other stuff. And she said, how come you've never told me? But I mean, what do I say on Monday morning? How's your weekend going? Oh, it was shit. My son had a seizure. He's not doing all this. And then, most people, when you say that, they're kind of like, whoa. I didn't really want to hear about that. So now I'm starting to go. Still, I can get pretty angry pretty fast. I've gotten better, but still angry. But now I'm starting to hit depression. People are finding out. They want to question more. My son got his West syndrome with that steroid treatment. He was cured of that. I will say, side note, roid rage is a real thing. So if anyone says it's not, my son was very angry that month. It was one of our hardest months. So in my mind, I was born and raised Christian. Like I needed a miracle. You read about all this stuff if you're Christian in the Bible, like how hard could it be to cure my son? And I remember one night I told my wife, I said, you go and take a shower. I'll give Ezra meds. I'll put him to bed, which I don't do all the time. But really, I used that time. She went in the shower, and I prayed harder than I prayed on any deployment, for both my men while I was deployed, and then for myself. And I said, please, show me a sign in the morning that you fixed him, you cured him. And I woke up that morning again, told my wife, I'll get the boy, and tried to talk to him, and he couldn't talk. There was no sign, and so that morning was when I still knew from my faith that God existed. But I said, I know you're up there, but you're selfish and you're lazy. And I renounced my faith. And I said, I'll go at this alone, and I'll do it my way since you're not helping me anyways. So it was about 2.5 years. And I became a walking, talking hypocrite, full on depression. But during that time, my wife found her faith. So when we met, she wasn't Christian. I don't believe in ever forcing it upon people. But we wanted to baptize our son. At the same time, she got baptized. And then I made sure we went to church every Sunday because I didn't want people to find out, and I was just faking it. And but my wife knew the whole time, right? She's my best friend. She's close. She knows what's going on. So what happened? So there wasn't any. It was the SKS conference, but again, you heard me talk like I was in here. I didn't even go to the social first night. I said I need to take care of my daughter. I don't want her around all these SKS kids. I don't think she can handle it. I didn't really want to see those that were there. I didn't want to talk. I was like, oh, we're going to hug each other and say everything's going to be great and stuff. And it's not great. So that was really the first wake-up call. I started to be in the testing phase, and it was really because of the foundation that became therapeutic. And you say there, I'm a big Dr. Brene Brown fan. If you haven't read her stuff or seen her thing on Netflix, I highly recommend it. Again, this is coming from a egotistical, prideful, tough guy. Like when my wife said, hey, let's watch this Netflix special, I'm like, oh man, let's watch Conan or something. Like, I gotta watch this thing. But it's phenomenal. So I can't say enough. And that's when I found my faith again. I really just put in the work. I don't believe in prayers and hope that isn't backed by work, and that's what everyone's doing in this room. And this is the work. There's stuff on the foundation here. Roy Cooper, North Carolina, declared a SKS day a couple years in a row. With the Army, I've worked on special needs side. This is the power of my son Ezra. What really happened is, which I saw as such a hindrance in my life. Like my only son can't have SKS. Like he's supposed to be all that is man. But he became my superpower because we don't get days off in this room. My wife often says, every day is a Monday. So for my peers, my coworkers, I'm just working harder than them. They get their vacations and stuff, go have it. I'm going to put in the work. So when people say, how do you do all this? I'm like, there's no days off. So just put in the work. Here's a good analogy I like to share with grief. My wife was really one who brought this up, but whoever said time heals all wounds is full of it. I'll just say that right there. It's just what I believe in, but it is a rock that you carry. Everyone in this room knows that some days it's a smooth skipping stone. You don't even notice what's going on maybe with your kid, or you accepted it and everything's fine. It's your new normal. Other days it's tough, you notice it, but you can go about your day. And some days it's a huge rock that just getting out of bed is tough. I love the Lepores. I love Charlie. But I'll be honest with you, if I went back to my room and, I can't talk to my son, I can't, work with him and stuff. And it hits me too. So it hits everyone. But I'll say this is a quote I lived by when I did a Golden Gloves boxing as a teenager, and it's more true today than ever. I love Bruce Lee, and he's a great philosopher, and that's what I don't pray for an easy life anymore. I pray for strength to endure this difficult one, but I hope in some way this helped you, so thank you.